Welcome to my channel, where every story comes to life. Dive into captivating narratives that spark your imagination. Let's start today. New narrative story. Greg Thompson, 48, a hard-working construction manager from Melbourne, Australia. He is reliable, honest, and devoted, having raised his daughter Emily with strong values. His rough exterior hides a vulnerable heart, one that has been bruised by life, but remains steadfastly loyal to his loved ones. Sophie Wilson, 45, Greg's ex-wife, a successful marketing executive in Sydney. She's polished, elegant, and ambitious, qualities that attracted Greg in the beginning but later became sources of division. Their marriage fell apart when Sophie had an affair with Dan, leaving Greg broken. Dan Murray, 50, Sophie's boyfriend, now a high-ranking executive in the marketing industry. He's charming, smooth-talking, and knows how to manipulate people to his advantage. Greg always had his suspicions, but Sophie's affair with Dan blindsided him. Emily Thompson, 24, Greg and Sophie's only daughter. A talented event planner living in Sydney, Emily is caught between the lives of her estranged parents. While she adores her father deep down, her mother's influence and the complexity of their divorce have distanced her from him. Greg Thompson was sipping his evening beer after a long day's work when his phone buzzed. Sitting alone in his small but comfortable apartment on the outskirts of Melbourne, Greg glanced at the screen, hoping it was Emily. It had been weeks since they last spoke, and he was anxious to hear how her wedding plans were going. But it wasn't a message from Emily. It was a picture, a wedding invitation. He stared at it, his heart sinking. The invitation wasn't addressed to him, but the photo had been posted on Emily's Instagram story. It was elegant, printed in gold lettering with delicate floral designs. His heart twisted as he read the details. Emily and Lucas are tying the knot on October 12th at Golden Hills Estate, Sydney. October 12th. That was tomorrow. Greg felt the blood drain from his face. He had known the wedding was approaching, but he had he had hoped, that Emily had simply forgotten to send the invitation. Surely she wouldn't exclude him from the biggest day of her life. He couldn't breathe. His own daughter had left him out of her wedding. His mind raced back to the conversations they'd had months ago when Emily first got engaged. He had offered to help pay for the wedding, walk her down the aisle, and support her in any way he could. Her response had always been the same. "Don't worry about it, Dad. We're keeping it small." It was a lie. It had to be. Greg scrolled through the comments below the Instagram post. Hundreds of them. Old friends, family, people he hadn't spoken to in years were all congratulating Emily. Everyone knew about the wedding. Everyone except him. Greg's heart pounded, his hand shaking as he set the phone down. Memories of Emily's childhood flashed before him, the family vacations, the bedtime stories, teaching her how to ride a bike. He had been there through it all, loving her unconditionally. How could she turn her back on him like this? He picked up the phone again, dialing Emily's number. It rang twice before going straight to voicemail. He tried again. Voicemail. Frustration bubbled inside him, and he gripped the phone tighter. A text message notification popped up. It was from Sophie. "Greg, don't make this harder than it needs to be. Emily made her choice. Please respect it. We don't need any drama tomorrow." Drama? Respect her choice? Greg slammed the phone down onto the table. His ex-wife had clearly played a part in this, and it didn't take a genius to figure out who would be walking his daughter down the aisle. Dan. The man who had stolen Sophie from him, the man who had crept into their lives, pretending to be a family friend. Greg always suspected something, but he never imagined it would come to this. For years, Greg had tried to put the past behind him, to move on from the betrayal of Sophie's affair with Dan. But now, knowing that Dan would be the one standing where he belonged, escorting Emily down the aisle, it was too much to bear. He had been replaced in his own family, as if he no longer mattered. Greg hadn't always been this disconnected from his family. There was a time when life was good, even happy. He and Sophie met in their early 20s, both fresh out of school, working to build a future. Greg had started as an apprentice carpenter before eventually landing a stable job as a site manager. They married young, had Emily soon after, and for a while, life was beautiful. But as Sophie's career in marketing skyrocketed, their relationship began to change. Sophie was no longer content with Greg's simple, grounded life. She craved excitement, something more than what Greg could offer. The late nights at the office, business trips, networking events started to create a distance between them. But Greg loved her, and he believed in their marriage. He ignored the warning signs. Sophie coming home later and later, her laughter when she texted someone late at night, and the way she began to dress up more for work events. Greg had never been the jealous type, but Dan Murray, there was something about him that Greg didn't trust. He was always around Sophie, always making jokes at Greg's expense. But Greg trusted Sophie, at least he wanted to. Then one evening, Greg found the messages. He wasn't the kind of man to snoop, but something had felt off for months, and he needed answers. He saw the texts between Sophie and Dan. Flirtatious messages that left no doubt in his mind. His heart shattered as the realization hit him. His wife was having an affair. When he confronted Sophie, she didn't deny it. Instead, she looked at about to begin. But Greg couldn't let this moment pass. He moved quickly, his feet carrying him toward the center of the ceremony before he could stop himself. Chapter 5. A Father's Last Stand. As Greg moved toward the ceremony, the eyes of the guests began to shift in his direction. The soft murmurs of conversation stopped, and an uneasy silence filled the air. He could feel the weight of their gazes, but he didn't care. All that mattered to him was Emily, his daughter, who was about to walk down the aisle with the man who had destroyed his family. Sophie saw him first. Her eyes widened in shock, and she whispered something to Dan, who turned around, his smug smile faltering when he saw Greg approaching. Greg's presence was like a storm cloud on a sunny day, and the atmosphere shifted dramatically. "Greg," Sophie began, stepping forward, her voice low and firm as if to warn him. But Greg was done being warned, silenced and pushed aside. He was done being the afterthought in his own family's story. Emily, who had been focused on the ceremony, now looked up and saw her father standing just a few meters away. Her face paled, and for a moment, their eyes locked. In that instant, Greg saw everything he needed to see: the guilt, the fear, and maybe even a flicker of regret. "Dad?" Emily's voice was small, barely audible over the sound of the wind rustling through the vines. She stood frozen, her arm still linked with Dan's, her mind clearly reeling from his sudden arrival. Greg's heart pounded, his emotions a storm that he could barely control. But this wasn't about anger or revenge anymore. It was about being heard, about making sure his daughter knew what this meant to him. "Emily," Greg said, his voice loud enough for everyone to hear but soft enough to convey the pain that had been building inside him for years. "I love you. I've always loved you, and I thought I was going to be the one to walk you down the aisle today." The guests shifted uncomfortably, unsure of how to react to the sudden emotional confrontation. Sophie's face hardened, clearly prepared to intervene and shut down the situation, but Greg pressed on. "I don't know what happened between us, why you felt like you couldn't have me here, but I'm your father, and I've been there for you your whole life, and I deserve to be a part of this day." Tears welled up in Emily's eyes, her lip trembling as she glanced between her father and Dan, who was still standing there awkwardly, his grip on Emily's arm loosening. For a moment, Greg feared she might just go through with it, that she might turn her back on him completely. But then, something shifted in her expression. The fear and confusion faded. replaced by a look of deep remorse. She stepped away from Dan, gently removing her arm from his. The guests gasped softly, unsure of what was happening. "Dad?" Emily's voice cracked as she stepped toward him. I didn't invite you because I didn't want you to be upset. I thought it would be easier, less complicated if—" Greg shook his head, his eyes filled with unshed tears. "Easier? For who? For you? Or for them?" Emily's face crumbled and tears began to stream down her cheeks. "I'm sorry, Dad. I'm so sorry." She was shaking now, her hands clutching the folds of her wedding dress as if to anchor herself. "I thought you didn't want to be a part of my life anymore. That you moved on after the divorce. After everything. How could you think that?" Greg's voice softened as he stepped closer, closing the distance between them. "You're my daughter. You've always been my everything." There was a brief silence before Emily rushed into his arms, sobbing against his chest. Greg held her tightly, his own tears falling as the emotions of the past few years finally spilled out. For a moment, time seemed to stop. The guests sat in stunned silence, watching the father and daughter reunion unfold before them. Sophie stood nearby, her arms crossed over her chest, her lips pursed in a thin line. Dan, who had been standing awkwardly to the side, shifted uncomfortably but said nothing. The tension between him and Greg was palpable, but Greg wasn't here for him. He was here for Emily. "I'm sorry I didn't invite you, Dad," Emily whispered through her tears. "I thought Mom said it would be better this way. That it would be easier if Dan—" Greg pulled back slightly, his hands on her shoulders as he looked her in the eyes. "I know what your mother told you, Emily. But that doesn't matter now. I'm here. And I always will be." Emily nodded, wiping away her tears. She glanced back at the altar where Lucas, her fiancé, stood watching the scene unfold, a look of concern and understanding on his face. He didn't seem upset, just surprised. Emily smiled at him, her heart lighter than it had been all day. Taking a deep breath, Emily turned back to her father. "Will you still walk me down the aisle, Dad?" Greg felt his heart swell with pride and relief. "Of course I will." The atmosphere shifted. There was no more tension, no more uncertainty. The guests began to relax, and the awkward murmurs quieted as Emily linked her arm with her father's. The music started again, soft and serene, and the sun seemed to shine just a little brighter as they made their way down the aisle. As Greg walked beside Emily, he couldn't help but feel a sense of closure. All the pain and heartbreak of the past few years began to melt away with each step. It wasn't perfect, and it wasn't the day he had imagined for his daughter's wedding, but it was real. In that moment, nothing else mattered but the bond between father and daughter. As they reached the altar, Greg handed Emily over to Lucas, giving him a firm nod and a pat on the back. "Take care of her," he said, his voice thick with emotion. Lucas nodded solemnly, clearly understanding the weight of Greg's words. Greg stepped aside, taking his seat among the guests, who now looked at him with a new sense of respect. He had fought for his place in his daughter's life, and he had won. He watched with pride as Emily and Lucas exchanged vows, his heart full. After the ceremony, the reception was held under a large white tent near the vineyard. The guests mingled, and laughter filled the air as the newlyweds celebrated their union. Greg stood near the edge of the crowd, sipping his drink and watching Emily from afar. She looked radiant, happier than he had seen her in years. Sophie approached him, her face tight with frustration. "You just couldn't let it go, could you?" she muttered under her breath, her arms crossed as she glared at him. Greg turned to face her, his expression calm but firm. "This isn't about you, Sophie. It's about Emily. She needed her father today, and I wasn't going to let her down." Sophie scoffed, rolling her eyes. "She was fine without you." Greg shook his head, looking her straight in the eye. "No, she wasn't. and deep down, you know that. There was a brief moment of silence as Sophie's gaze faltered. She had always been proud, always wanted control, but today, she had lost. And Greg wasn't going to let her take that away from him. Sophie said nothing more, simply turning on her heel and walking away, her pride clearly bruised. Greg watched her go, but he felt no bitterness. He had won the only battle that mattered. Later that evening, as the sun began to set and the reception wound down, Emily found her father standing at the edge of the dance floor. She smiled, walking over to him with her new husband by her side. "Dad," Emily said softly, her eyes filled with gratitude. "Thank you for being here. For everything." Greg smiled, pulling her into a hug. "I wouldn't have missed it for the world." As they stood together, father and daughter reunited, Greg knew that things wouldn't be perfect moving forward. There were still wounds to heal, still conversations that needed to be had. But for the first time in years, he felt hope. Hope that he and Emily could rebuild their relationship. Hope that their bond would grow stronger with time. The night ended with Greg watching Emily and Lucas dance their first dance as husband and wife. He sat quietly at his table, his heart full, his soul lighter than it had been in a long time. He had lost so much over the years, but today he had regained something far more valuable, his place in his daughter's life. As the music played, Greg reflected on the journey that had brought him here. Life had a way of surprising you, of testing your strength and your resilience. But in the end, love, real, unconditional love, always found a way to shine through. If this story touched your heart, or if you could relate in any way, please leave a comment below. Share your thoughts, your experiences, or just some love. And don't forget to like and share this story if it resonated with you. We'd love to hear your feedback. Let's keep the conversation going.